Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Chair.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I'd just like to start by thanking the member who's resumed her seat for that contribution. Having had a look at the list of members of the Select Committee who actually heard submissions on this legislation, I think she is the only member in the House who was on the committee at the time, and obviously it helps that she chaired it. But I think what this shows us, just independently of expressing any view about the merits of what she said or the argument that she made, that it really doesn't do to leave these bills languishing on the order paper. The legislation was referred to the committee back on the 12th of April 2011. The closing date for submissions was 26 May, and looking at the list of membership, two of the committee aren't even in the House anymore. They didn't survive the November election that intervened between the committee's report and today. And I don't think, apart from Jackie Dean, there's any member of the committee otherwise who served at the time who's still on that committee. So just by way of general observation, I think I'm not going to speculate as to why this bill has taken so long to progress, although if it were of such burning importance, you might think the Minister would have given it higher priority. Perhaps it's the most charitable thing that can be said that she's still cleaning up after her predecessor, and that this bill...
No, she's been diverted by other matters.
Well, my colleague observes that maybe the truth is that she's been diverted by other matters. I'm sure he'll have more to say about that later in the debate. But whatever the case, let's hope that the House has seen the back of this sort of bill that's only really arguably needed and certainly not a burning priority, just like the next item of business that I apprehend we're going to get to. I think the other thing that's worth saying, just by way of a general observation, does relate to priorities. We've had legislation relating to perhaps the major driver of crime in New Zealand, alcohol, on the order paper for some time, and we still haven't got to it. I do hope, and I hope the Chair will indulge me because I've got the Minister in the chair here and I can express this view directly to her. I do hope we are going to see that progressed with some priority and some expedition, rather than legislation like this, which at least very arguably deals with matters that are adequately provided for in the legislation already. Now, on the question of Mr O'Rourke's SOP, I accept what the government has said to an extent. The government has decided not to remove on an ongoing basis the exemption for persons over the age of 65 to serve on a jury, and they're calling it a benefit. Well, frankly, I think that's patronising. The Juries Act dates back to 1981, dates back to an era before we had compulsory retirement, when we had compulsory retirement at the age of 65. People didn't have the choice. That was when they were deemed by the law to be old, deemed by the law to start becoming past it, and required to retire. That hasn't been the case for many a year, and it would have been open to the government to have said, well, we are updating the law here. We could actually dispense with the arbitrary requirement that somebody at the age of 65 can be excused from jury service simply by reason that they reach a certain age. We just don't do that in our law and practice in New Zealand anymore. And I'm, like the rest of the House, sympathetic to the type of situation that the Minister recounted. She talked about a family member who was infirm, had motor neurone disease, didn't want to go through the process of having to seek an exclusion every time she was called for jury service. Well, sir, people at any age can get motor neurone disease. People at any age can be afflicted by an infirmity that makes them either uncomfortable or right out incapable of serving on a jury or performing some other sort of civic service. The way that that ought to be dealt with, sir, is by a straight-out, Mr Chairman, by a straight-out exemption on the basis of disability. It ought to be the case that if somebody cannot serve, then clearly they should be able to be excused on the basis of that infirmity. It has nothing to do with age. People in New Zealand now who are over the age of 65, many people find this sort of debate and this sort of arbitrary provision completely patronising. And I think if we think about the case that was argued by Julianne Genter, there is actually no need for an arbitrary age in this area, just as we don't have arbitrary ages across a whole lot of areas of our law. It simply isn't, as I said earlier, the way we do things, sir. And so it is a little disappointing that we've heard the contributions that we've had on the age issue. Like my colleague Leanne Dalzell and like the other members of the Labour opposition, we will be, if we have the opportunity, voting in support of Dennis O'Rourke's amendment, which would do away with this patronising anachronism around the age of 65 in respect of jury service.
Call Jackie Dean.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just wanted to make another quick call on